Hey guys, welcome back to the Red Bed. Today I've lined up over 2 hours of real-life Reddit stories for you to relax with, whether you're falling asleep, chilling out, or just want something playing in the background. And while you listen, I'll be sharing some hardcore gameplay I got today, where I travel throughout the world to hopefully find a nice spot to build my base. And to switch things up a little, I'll also be sharing my friend's gameplay later on, where he explores an ocean monument. But anyways, kick back, relax, and enjoy. This first story is about someone who lost their dad years ago, only to later discover a hidden side of him through an old journal found in the attic. 6 years ago, I lost my dad to a sudden heart attack. There was no warning. One moment, he was out in the yard tinkering with the lawnmower, and the next, he was gone. He was 58 years old. Growing up, I thought I knew my dad, but only in that surface level way you know someone who keeps to themselves. He was a quiet man, the kind of dad who didn't say, "I love you," with words, but with small gestures, asking if I'd check the oil in my car, making sure the house was in working order, or fixing whatever broke before anyone had a chance to complain about it. He sat in the same chair every night at dinner, watched the same shows, and followed the same routines. I understood him through habits, not through feelings. Then last month, while helping my mom clean out the attic, I stumbled across a box shoved into a corner. The label on top was written in faded Sharpie, "Tom's Things, 1981 to 1993. Inside was a jumble of old belongings, his beat-up college backpack, a few cassette tapes, and a small journal. At first I hesitated to open it. It felt private, like I'd be crossing into something not meant for my eyes. But curiosity slowly pushed that hesitation aside. I cracked it open. The first entry was dated October 14th, 1982. It read, "First time I told her I loved her today. Didn't mean to. It just came out. She was laughing about something, how the microwave makes leftovers taste like sadness. I looked at her and just said it. She said it back, but I think I surprised her. Hell, I surprised myself. It hit me immediately. He was talking about my mom, reading about them in their 20s, young and in love, before mortgages and kids and the stress of bills. I realized I was seeing a version of him I never knew existed. Entry after entry pulled me deeper into his inner world. He wrote about the night I was born, how terrified he felt because I came premature. He admitted he used to stand outside my bedroom door in the dark, listening to me breathe just to make sure I was okay. He wrote about the crushing weight he felt in 1998 when he got laid off, convinced he was failing as a provider, even though he never let us see how scared he was. Then I came across an entry from when I went off to college. He said he was so proud when I got accepted, but he broke down the night before we left because he didn't know how to say goodbye. One line stopped me cold. He'll never know it, but I stood outside his dorm after dropping him off, just watched the window until his light turned on. That's when I knew he was going to be okay. And I wasn't. I sat there in the attic with tears streaming down my face, reading page after page in one sitting. For years, I believed he was distant, that he didn't feel things deeply. But here, in his own handwriting, was proof of how wrong I was. He felt everything. He just carried it quietly, silently, without letting it spill over onto us. I ended up copying a handful of the entries and framing them as a gift for my mom. When she read them, she broke down completely. She told me through tears that she'd always known how deeply he loved us, but seeing it written in his own words gave her something she didn't realize she'd needed all these years. Reading that journal changed how I remember him. My dad didn't love quietly. He loved loudly, just not in the ways I had learned to listen for. That's the end of this story. That was a heavy one, but also kind of beautiful in its own way. It's wild how something as simple as an old journal can completely shift how you see a person. It makes you think about how much people hold inside that they never say out loud. Honestly, it's the kind of story that sticks with you long after you hear it. This next story is about a waiter who watched a seemingly perfect date take a sharp turn when the generous, charming customer revealed a much shadier side. We had a guy come in last night with his date, and from the moment they sat down, he seemed like the dream customer. He was polite, thanked me every time I brought water or checked in, and even brushed off a small kitchen mistake like it was nothing. On top of that, he was being extra nice. So at first I figured he was just in a great mood because his date was going well. They were chatting, laughing, and clearly having a good time. To give you an idea, he was in full celebration mode. He ordered the best wine we had on the menu, let her pick the most expensive entree without hesitation, and when she couldn't decide on an appetizer, he simply ordered one of everything for her to try. It was a feast. By the time the night was winding down, I thought I had seen it all. When I brought out the check, I asked if they wanted it together or separate. She opened her mouth to say separate, but he cut her off quickly, making a big scene about how of course it was together. He went on and on, telling her, "You never have to pay when you're with me, babe," while sliding me his credit card like he was putting on a show. The total came to $289. Without even blinking, he scribbled down a $100 tip, making a point to look confident while telling me how underappreciated waitstaff are. He gave this little speech about how if you can't plan to tip, you shouldn't plan to eat out. But while he said all that, he never once looked at me. His eyes were locked on her, like every word was part of the act. Honestly, I didn't care who he was trying to impress. I was too focused on the $100 he had just left me. I thanked him sincerely, and he brushed it off, saying I didn't even need to thank him. I wished them a good night, and off they went. About 90 seconds later, though, the door opened again, and in he came, without her. He pretended at first like he'd forgotten something, but when the door shut behind him, he leaned in and said quietly, "Mark the tip down to $20, hun. I was just playing it up for my date. You understand." Then he turned to leave like nothing had happened. I stood there stunned, realizing he had just played both me and his date. He wasn't generous at all. He was manipulative, and that poor girl had no idea. I confirmed his request out loud, repeating, "So you'd like me to change your tip from 100 down to 20, correct?" I gave him that one last chance to rethink it. Instead, he got hostile, snapping back that if I charged him more, he'd dispute the entire bill with his credit card company. It stung. Not just the tip being slashed from generous to cheap, but seeing how this guy was faking his entire personality to impress her. It reminded me of toxic people I dealt with in the past, and I wanted so badly to warn her. But I was at work, and I couldn't exactly start airing out a customer's secrets in front of the whole restaurant. So I processed the change, but I didn't feel settled about it. Then I realized I might still have one last chance. I darted outside, scanning for them in the parking lot. Luckily, they hadn't left yet. Their car was parked on the street, and he was still fiddling with the parking meter while she waited inside. I ran across, waving my arms like a lunatic to get their attention. She rolled down her window, curious. I looked right at him and said, loud enough for her to hear every word, "Sir, we amended your tip from 100 down to 20, just like you asked. But I'll need you to fill out a new receipt for our records. The old one still shows the 100, and we can't have that discrepancy." His jaw dropped. He tried to play dumb, mumbling about how I must be mistaking him for someone else. But I didn't let up. I calmly repeated myself, over and over. "You came back in. You changed your tip from 100 down to 20. She was staring at him now, clearly confused. He squirmed, his act falling apart in real time. Finally, he gave up and muttered something about miscommunication, then begrudgingly filled out a new receipt with the $20 tip written clearly on it. The whole time she was watching, and the anger radiating off of him was almost comical. He looked like he wanted to burn a hole through me with his eyes, but he had no way out. I let him walk away, but deep down I was satisfied. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about pulling back the curtain so she could see the kind of man he really was. That's where this story finishes. That one's kind of wild. The way he put on that whole show just to look impressive, then try to sneak back and undo it. It really shows how fake some people can be. I like how the server found a clever way to expose him without making a scene inside. Honestly, it's one of those moments where you can almost feel the secondhand satisfaction. Hopefully, that girl started putting the pieces together on the way home. This next story is about a young worker who made a dangerous mistake at a warehouse, only for a surprising coworker to step in and change the course of his life. When I was 18, I got a job working at a massive distribution center for one of the biggest home improvement chains in the country. I was placed in the appliances department, which meant I operated this huge forklift-like machine. It wasn't a regular forklift with two forks on the front. Instead, it had these giant clamps that could squeeze around big items like refrigerators. The machine was powerful enough to lift 6 refrigerators at once, as long as they were stacked the right way. Inside the warehouse, refrigerators were stored in tall stacks, 6 units high. Every time I looked up at those towering rows, I felt a mix of awe and nerves. Grabbing something from the very top row was always nerve-wracking, even on a good day when I was fully rested. But on this particular morning, I was anything but rested. The night before, I'd made the dumb decision to stay out late with a girl I'd just started dating. When my alarm went off a couple hours later, I rolled out of bed knowing I'd barely slept. 2 hours of sleep, heavy machinery, and an 18-year-old brain that thought it could handle anything. Not exactly the safest combination. I showed up to work, bleary-eyed, and tried to push through. Eventually, I had to grab a refrigerator from the very top row. Just looking up at it made my stomach tighten. I maneuvered my machine into place, carefully lined up the clamps, and pulled forward. I managed to get a solid grip on the fridge, and for a moment, I thought I was fine. But then came the part where I needed to back up and lower the load. My tired brain betrayed me. Instead of lowering the clamps, I hit the wrong lever. In an instant, the refrigerator slipped free and dropped. I can still hear the crash. That deep, heavy thud of metal smashing against the concrete floor, softened only a little by the packaging it was wrapped in. I froze, horrified. This was a brand new, expensive refrigerator, and I had just destroyed it. Before I could even process what happened, one of my coworkers ran over. He was someone I barely knew, just another face in the warehouse. He asked quickly, "Did anyone see that?" I shook my head, my hands trembling. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. The guy looked at me, saw how shaken I was, and without saying much, he grabbed his barcode scanner. In the warehouse, everything we did was tracked through those scanners. It was how items were logged, moved, and assigned. He scanned the fridge, essentially taking ownership of it, and then did something I never expected. He picked up the broken refrigerator with his machine, drove it to a random truck that was being loaded, and shoved it inside. Then he stacked a bunch of other items in front of it, hiding it completely. I stared at him, confused and a little stunned. I finally asked, "Why did you do that?" That's when he told me his story. He explained that he was about to go to prison for his third driving under the influence charge. The company wasn't holding his job for him while he served time. So, in his words, he had nothing to lose. He looked at me and said, "You're only 18. You got your whole life ahead of you. Don't let one mistake ruin it. You got a lot more to lose than I do." I couldn't believe it. Here was a guy I hardly knew, someone dealing with his own problems, and yet he stepped in to protect me. Then he added something I'll never forget. He said, "There's a better life than this warehouse bullshit. Go make something of yourself." Those words stuck. I walked away from that situation shaken, but also thinking about what he said. I ended up going to my boss and telling him I was too exhausted to safely operate machinery. I asked to leave early, and I went straight home and crashed into bed. But over the next couple of weeks, his words kept replaying in my head. After a lot of thinking, I decided to take action. I went to a recruiter and enlisted in the military. That one decision completely changed the path of my life. I served, got out, and now I'm doing better than I ever thought I would. My life looks nothing like it would have if I'd stayed in that warehouse, dragging myself through the motions day after day. And I owe a huge part of that to a man whose name I can't even remember. I never saw him again after he went to prison, and I never heard another word about that refrigerator. But his choice to step in and cover for me, and the advice he gave me in the middle of all that, it ended up changing everything. That story wraps up here. It's wild how someone you barely know can end up leaving such a huge mark on your life. Like, he probably never realized how much that moment stuck. It's the kind of thing that reminds you how unpredictable people can be, in the best way. Sometimes the right words just hit you at the exact time you need to hear them. This next story is about two friends who faced a dangerous situation on a flooded causeway, only for things to spiral into a wrecked car, blame, and even legal threats afterward. Early one November evening, after work, my buddy Aaron and I headed out to pick up some car parts he'd bought on eBay. The drive took us along some back roads, and for the first part, everything was pretty normal. We reached the property, loaded up the parts, and started the trip back home. The only catch was that the weather had turned. It had rained earlier in the day, but now it was really coming down. Steady sheets hitting the windshield and making the whole drive feel a little more tense. On the way there, we had passed over a causeway. At the time, it was fine. Nothing unusual. But less than an hour later, when we came back to that same spot, it looked completely different. The water had risen so much that it was now flowing right over the road, about half a meter deep. We stopped in front of it, headlights reflecting off the moving water. I could hear the sound of rushing currents underneath, louder than before, and I immediately got a bad feeling. I was navigating, and I knew there was another way around. It would have added maybe 10 kilometers to the trip, but it was safer. That route included a bridge over the same river, but at least the road itself wouldn't be submerged. I told Aaron we had to turn back. There was no way I was going to try driving through that. My reaction was colored by something from years earlier. About 20 years ago, I'd actually been caught on a causeway in high water. Back then, my car got pushed toward the edge, and I almost lost it completely. I didn't drown, but it was one of the scariest moments of my life. That memory rushed back as soon as I saw the water that night. I wasn't about to go through that again, but Aaron had other ideas. He shook his head, muttered something about it being fine, and before I could argue more, he started moving forward. The car crept into the water. My heart dropped. I panicked and immediately opened the door. I stepped out before things got dangerous, making sure not to let any water inside as I got clear of the car. The moment my feet hit the wet road, I could feel the rain pelting down harder, and the current roaring louder just a few feet ahead. Aaron kept going without me. He didn't even make it halfway across before the water shoved the car sideways. I froze as the headlights tilted and disappeared. In seconds, the car rolled completely over in the flood. My stomach turned as I watched it tumble downstream like a toy. Somehow it ended upright on the bank, about 50 meters downstream. I ran as fast as I could down the embankment, the rain stinging my face, the mud sucking at my shoes. Thankfully, Aaron had managed to get out. He was soaked, coughing, but alive. The whole thing could have easily ended in tragedy. Instead of relief, though, Aaron was furious. The first thing he said to me was that if I'd stayed in the car, my weight would have helped keep it steady, and he would have made it across. I was stunned. I mean, yes, I'm a heavier guy, about 130 kilos, but his car was a full-size Commodore wagon weighing over 1,600 kilos. Plus, it was loaded with a couple hundred kilos of parts in the back. My weight wouldn't have made the slightest difference. It was pure water pressure that had flipped that car. We ended up calling for help, and within an hour the river dropped enough that we could walk across the causeway on foot. It was eerie how quickly the danger passed, but the damage was already done. His car was totaled, and his pride was clearly just as battered. Since that night, Aaron hasn't spoken to me. He's avoided me at places we both normally hang out, which honestly just adds to how awkward everything feels. Then, just when I thought it couldn't get stranger, a letter showed up in my mailbox. It was from a lawyer in town. A lawyer I know is legit, but the letter itself, it sounded exactly like something Aaron had written. The demand? $50,000. He claimed I'd made his car unsafe by getting out and leaving him to drive across alone. He wanted me to cover damages for the car and for his personal suffering. The kicker? His car was a 1997 Commodore worth maybe $1,500 on its best day. Now I can't shake the question rolling around in my head. Am I really supposed to sit in someone's car when they're doing something reckless just so they feel supported? Deep down I know the answer, but the whole situation has me shaking my head. That's where this story ends. That whole thing just sounds unreal. Like, the guy nearly drowned, and his biggest takeaway was to blame someone else. It's wild how quick people can flip the script when their pride gets hit. Honestly, I'd be more focused on being grateful I was alive than drafting up some lawyer letter. It leaves you wondering if that friendship was ever as solid as it seemed. This next story is about a new mom who clashed with her mother-in-law after she repeatedly let herself into the house and even took the baby without asking. My partner's parents have a key to our house, but from the very beginning, the agreement was clear. It was meant only for emergencies, like if something happened to us, or if we locked ourselves out. That's it. But ever since I had my baby 3 weeks ago, my mother-in-law has been letting herself in whenever she feels like it. She doesn't call first. She doesn't knock. She just walks in. And most of the time, she heads straight upstairs, right into my bedroom, even when I'm resting in bed with the baby. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself she was just excited to be a grandmother. But it kept happening, and honestly, it was starting to feel like my home wasn't even mine anymore. The final straw happened yesterday. My partner had already gone back to work, so it was just me and the baby at home. I was exhausted and decided to take a nap. The baby was sound asleep in his crib right next to me, and I drifted off feeling like everything was okay. A couple of hours later, I woke up suddenly in a panic. Normally, I get woken up by his little cries when he's hungry because I breastfeed. But this time, I rolled over and looked at the crib, and my heart nearly stopped. It was empty. He wasn't there. I jumped up, my chest tight, and started frantically searching. My mind went to the darkest places immediately. I rushed down the stairs, and when I got to the living room door, it was shut. Behind it, I heard my baby crying. I pushed the door open, and there she was, my mother-in-law, just sitting calmly with him in her arms. She looked up at me, gave this casual smile, and said, "Someone's grumpy today." Like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't just taken my baby without asking and left me terrified. I snapped back, "He's not grumpy. He should have had his feed over an hour ago." I scooped him up right away and held him close, my hands shaking as I carried him upstairs. She tried to follow me up the stairs, still acting like this was all normal. That's when I finally lost it. I turned around, my voice sharper than I'd ever used with her before, and said, "Please, put our house key on the side table and leave." She just stood there for a second, looking confused and irritated, but I repeated myself. Finally, she put the key down and left. Later that day, I found out she'd called my partner at work. When he got home, he brought it up. I braced myself for him to take her side, but thankfully, he didn't. He wasn't mad at me at all. In fact, he understood. He admitted that it was wrong of her and said he agreed with me. But he did mention that his mom was really upset. I told him flat out that I didn't care if she was upset. The fact that she doesn't mean any harm isn't the point. It's intrusive. It makes me feel unsafe in my own home, and I'm not okay with it. That's where this story ends. That must have been such a tense moment. Having your space crossed like that feels exhausting, even to hear about. It's one of those situations where the lines between family and boundaries get really blurry. Honestly, I think most people listening would have reacted the same way in that spot. This next story is about neighbors whose friendship completely fell apart after hidden resentments over parking, property access, and even kids' toys finally boiled over. For years, I thought we got along fine with our neighbors. We'd wave, chat occasionally, and there was never any sign of hostility. But everything changed once they put their house on the market. At first, I figured they were just moving on with life. Instead, it quickly turned into a list of complaints I never expected. They started telling us why their house wasn't selling. According to them, potential buyers didn't like the sight of our kids' play equipment. They didn't like the trampoline. They thought the parking was too tight, the horses in the yard were an issue, and even that our garden looked too messy. It was like every little thing about how we lived was suddenly up for criticism. Eventually, it all came to a head. They told us point blank that we were the worst neighbors they'd ever had, and even went so far as to say we were too poor to live in our own property. That one stung. I didn't even know they'd been holding on to all this resentment until it came spewing out all at once. One of the main issues they raised was our cars. They said they were too big, that they stuck out too far on the drive. The thing is, the drive is legally ours. They only have a right of access over a section of it. The deeds don't mention parking at all. It's strictly vehicle and pedestrian right-of-way. They actually have their own garage and a small parking space on their property. Meanwhile, we're very careful. We only ever park on the section of the drive that isn't part of their right-of-way. That spot used to be part of our front garden before we converted it into parking. To be clear, I even showed them the deeds and boundaries to prove we were in the right, but they dismissed me completely. And that's when all their built-up anger came pouring out. At least now I know where we stand with them. What makes this more frustrating is that their visitors regularly park on our drive. Estate agents, prospective buyers, random guests, you name it. None of them technically have any rights to do that. We've never once raised an issue trying to be neighborly, but after all this, it feels unfair. Fast forward a bit, and they ended up dropping their house price by a whopping £125,000. Honestly, I think the real reason they weren't selling before is that they had priced it way too high. Now apparently they've found a buyer. Here's where things get tricky. I have no idea what arrangements they've shared with that buyer, but I'm fairly sure they haven't been upfront about the parking issue. From my perspective, it's better for us if it's made clear now, rather than me having to explain it to new neighbors after they've already moved in. But at the same time, I don't want to be accused of obstructing their sale. I don't know if there's even a way to make sure it's flagged during conveyancing, or if I just have to sit back and wait. The reason I care so much is simple. Parking on the right of way creates problems. It tightens the turning circle, and since we live on a busy road, that's dangerous. I also own a trailer, and I need that space clear so I can maneuver it properly. Beyond that, I worry that if I let people park there once or twice, it'll eventually turn into an assumed right. And on top of all that, we've got animals. I'm often crossing the drive with a wheelbarrow or equipment, and I need the space open. For context, the exact wording in the deed says this: property to the north, the right, A, to pass and repass over and along the driveway, colored brown on the said plan for the purpose of gaining access to and egress from the said property, to the north, upon payment of a proportionate part of the expense of keeping the same in repair. So it's crystal clear to me. It's a right of way, not a right to park. But that hasn't stopped this entire situation from spiraling. That's where the story ends. That whole neighbor situation sounds like such a headache. It's wild how fast people can flip from being friendly to outright hostile once money and property are involved. Honestly, the most surprising part is how many little grudges they've been holding on to for years without saying anything. Makes you wonder what the new neighbors will be like once they move in. This next story is about a family who hosted a wedding at their home, only to clash with the Maid-of-Honor after she insulted their effort, culture, and traditions. The wedding wasn't held at some fancy venue. It wasn't a place with chandeliers, air-conditioned ballrooms, or staff waiting to refill champagne glasses. It was held at my parents' home, the place where our family has lived and celebrated life for over 3 decades. The couple chose it because it mattered to them, not because it came with a package deal. This was the house where my cousins and I grew up. It's where my kids played, where my brother still comes on Sundays for laundry and a meal, where my grandkids run barefoot in the yard, and where 4 generations have laughed and grieved together. Out back, behind the house, stands a cedar tree line, 40 feet tall and 250 feet wide. We've watched sunsets behind those trees through every season of life. That's the backdrop they wanted. That's why it was sacred. So, when the maid of honor wrinkled her nose and complained about how things looked, I couldn't believe it. She walked into the house and criticized the decorations, calling them homemade. Well, of course they were homemade. Our cousins had spent weeks cutting, painting, gluing, and stringing things together. They burned their fingers on hot glue guns and stained their clothes with paint, bending over tables late into the night just to make everything special. The porch she stood on had been repainted to match the colors of the wedding. The garden she dismissed so easily had been weeded and watered by my 71-year-old mother every single day. The acre of land beneath her feet had been mowed faithfully by my almost 80-year-old father, and he even did it an extra time just for the wedding. The food wasn't from some banquet kitchen either. It was cooked by us, in our kitchens, with our family recipes, seasoned with care. And yes, the air conditioning struggled, and there weren't enough bathrooms for 100 people. But this is Texas in September. Even the dragonflies don't stay where you want them to. We stretched a home meant for 5 to welcome 100, and we did it gladly. The maid of honor still found a way to complain. She scoffed at the music, annoyed when the DJ played boleros and cumbias, but he wasn't hired for her. He was hired to celebrate the couple and honor the culture that raised them. In our family, music isn't background noise. It's memory. It's tradition. It's inheritance. So when she wrinkled her nose at it, she wasn't just critiquing a playlist. She was dismissing an entire lineage of joy. What made it worse was her lack of presence. She showed up in time for the bachelorette party, which was paid for and planned by the groom's mother, but she never even saw the house until the day before the wedding. And instead of gratitude or help, she brought critique. She actually argued with me about the sun, the very sun I've been watching set in this yard my entire life. She stood there, new to the space, and thought she knew better than someone who has lived beneath those trees for decades. That's when it hit me. Everything she found fault with was built on sacrifice and love. Family gave their time, their labor, and their hearts to create something meaningful. What we needed from her wasn't complaints. It wasn't some Yelp-style review. What we needed was grace, gratitude, a little respect for what was given freely. Our family isn't rich in money, and we don't pretend to be, but we are rich in loyalty, in sacrifice, in traditions that stretch across generations. We welcomed her in with open arms. But when someone sits in my mother's chair, under the trees my father still cares for every week, and dismisses it as though it isn't good enough, we notice. And trust me when I say, we don't forget. Oh, and one last thing. She walked off with every strip of fashion tape I brought for the bridal party, 100 strips in total. To this day, I still wonder, was that really necessary? Or was that what it took to hold her audacity in place the entire evening? That story wraps up here. That one had a lot of fire behind it. You could just feel how much love and work went into making that wedding happen. It's crazy how one person can walk into something beautiful and only see flaws. Honestly, it says way more about her than it ever did about the family or the house. This next story is about a train passenger who clashed with careless parents after their kid spent the entire ride kicking, throwing, and even hitting him. I was traveling last weekend on a long-distance train, and right from the start, it was shaping up to be one of those nightmare trips. The train was delayed, the cars were overcrowded, and everyone looked tired and frustrated. I had at least managed to reserve a seat ahead of time, which felt like a small victory in the chaos. But when I finally got to my spot, there was already a family of 3 sitting in it, mom, dad, and a little boy, who looked maybe 7 or 8 years old. I tried to stay polite. I showed them my ticket, pointed out that it was my reserved seat, and asked them to move. They shifted over without much fuss, but it was clear from their body language they weren't thrilled about it. I settled in, thinking the worst of the trip was already behind me. Turns out, it was just beginning. Not even a minute after sitting down, I felt the first kick against the back of my seat. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just an accident, but then came another kick, and another. Before long, it was nonstop, this rhythmic thumping against my back. I tried to ignore it. I pulled out my phone, adjusted my posture, even tried to focus on the scenery outside the window, but the kicking just kept going. Finally, I turned around, looked at the parents, and as calmly as I could, asked if they could please have their son stop. They smiled at me, shrugged, and said, "He's just energetic. He'll calm down." Except he didn't calm down. He only seemed to ramp up. An hour into the trip, just when I thought maybe he'd burned himself out, I suddenly felt something cold and sticky hit the back of my head. I froze for a second, not sure what had just happened, until I realized he had thrown his juice box at me. Orange liquid splattered down the back of my shirt, soaking in. And of course, I was wearing a brand new white Lacoste crewneck tee. You can imagine the mess. That's when I snapped. I turned around sharply and told the parents this was completely unacceptable. Instead of apologizing, they rolled their eyes at me like I was being dramatic. The mom said, "Have some empathy. He's just a child." Meanwhile, I was sitting there sticky, uncomfortable, and already furious. A few minutes later, as if to prove how little control they had, the kid tried climbing over the seats. In the process, he smacked me on the arm. That was it for me. I stood up, flagged down the conductor, and explained everything that had been happening from the moment I sat down. The parents immediately went into defensive mode. They raised their voices, claiming I was harassing a child. But luckily, other passengers around us spoke up. They confirmed that they'd seen the whole thing. The kicking, the juice box, the hitting. The conductor didn't waste time. He told the parents plainly that they either needed to control their son or they'd have to get off at the next station. The dad started shouting about discrimination, demanding that it wasn't fair. But the decision was already made. When the train pulled into the next stop, the family was escorted off. The car finally went quiet, and I could breathe again. Later, though, I started to hear different opinions. Some people told me I was right to speak up, but others, including my girlfriend, said I had overreacted. Her take was that I should have just sucked it up, that kids are kids, and you can't expect them to behave perfectly. But here's how I see it. Kids might make noise, sure, but I shouldn't have to endure being kicked, hit, and covered in juice for hours just because parents don't feel like parenting. That story ends there. That's honestly such a rough situation. There's a big difference between a kid just being restless and parents completely checking out. I can't imagine anyone being happy about getting juice spilled all over them, especially on a white shirt. Sometimes it feels like people forget trains are shared spaces, not daycare centers on wheels. This next story is about 2 roommates whose constant conflict over stolen food led one of them to set up a very messy kind of revenge. I've been living with this girl for close to a year now. We weren't close friends before moving in together, just acquaintances who both needed a place to stay and figured it would make sense financially to split the rent. At first, everything seemed fine. We bought some groceries together, cooked meals side by side now and then, and for a while, the arrangement actually felt manageable. But over time, things started to shift. Little by little, she began dipping into my food. At first, it was just small stuff, like pouring some of my milk into her coffee or cracking a couple of my eggs for breakfast. But before long, it escalated. I'd come home and notice that full packs of chicken I'd bought had vanished, or snacks I'd been saving were gone. Even leftovers that I had clearly labeled with my name weren't safe. I brought it up more than once, but every time she brushed it off. Sometimes she laughed, saying she thought everything in the fridge was ours. Other times she acted like I was overreacting. Meanwhile, I knew exactly what I'd bought and what I was budgeting for. The truth is, I've been in a tough financial spot. My credit is a mess from mistakes I made when I was younger, and I've been working hard to rebuild. That means living on a strict budget. I don't go out much, I don't spend money on extras, and most of my meals are cooked at home. I literally count every dollar. Meanwhile, she works full-time, eats out constantly, orders takeout whenever she wants, and somehow still helps herself to my groceries. I tried talking to her more seriously about it. I explained how important sticking to my budget is, how I couldn't afford to replace food that disappeared. But she brushed it off again, rolling her eyes like it wasn't a big deal. That's when I finally hit my breaking point. One weekend, I decided to make a tray of brownies, but these weren't just regular brownies. I laced them with extra strength laxatives. I baked the batch, let them cool, and placed the tray neatly in the fridge, covered, looking like they were for me to enjoy later. Deep down, I already knew what would happen. Sure enough, she couldn't resist. She helped herself without asking, just like she always did, and the results came quick. That night, she was running back and forth to the bathroom nonstop. From the other room, I could hear her groaning, complaining about how she must have gotten food poisoning from some bad takeout. I kept my face straight, acted sympathetic, and even offered her some water. Inside, though, I knew exactly what had happened. The next day, she was still muttering about how unfair it was that her favorite restaurant had poisoned her. But I noticed something important after that night. The food stealing dropped way off. She still sneaks a bite here and there, but nothing like before. For the first time in months, I could open the fridge and actually expect my groceries to still be there. And the truth, I don't feel guilty. Not even a little. She had it coming. That's where this story finishes. That's one way to make a point. It's kind of wild that it had to get to that level just for someone to respect basic boundaries. The funny part is she probably still thinks it was just a random case of bad food. Some people only learn the hard way, I guess. This next story is about someone trying to sell cheap plants online, only to end up dealing with an entitled buyer who demanded more than she was willing to pay. I had a bunch of plants that I needed to clear out before fall. They weren't all going to fit back into my house, so I decided to post them on Facebook for $1 each. To make it fair, I even included rulers in the photos so people could see the exact size of the plants. 3 different buyers had already come by, and all of them were super kind. They even commented that my prices were way too low. One woman liked them so much that she actually paid me more than what I was asking. Then came the entitled buyer. She texted me early one morning, asking if I had anything left. I checked and told her I had 5 amaryllis seedlings for $1 each, and 10 more very small ones I'd sell at 2 for $1. She replied with, "I want $10 worth of plants." She was insistent about coming over right away, so I got them ready, gave her my address, and told her it was the White House on the hill by itself. When she showed up, she didn't even say hello before complaining. She looked around and said, "I was expecting greenhouses. I wanted to walk through and see everything you have for sale. I'm so disappointed." I motioned toward the box of plants I had prepared and said, "I'm not sure why you expected that. I told you this box was the last of everything I had left." She cut me off, almost shouting, "You are all over Amy's page." I blinked at her, confused. "Excuse me?" She leaned in, emphasizing each word. "You are all over Amy's page." I shook my head and said, "You must have me confused with someone else. I don't even know who Amy is." She got even more frustrated. "Amy? She runs the little plant shop. Everyone knows Amy." I told her again I didn't know her and wasn't connected to her page. Then I tried to hand her the plants she had asked for. She sighed loudly, muttered under her breath, and started whining about how small the seedlings were. I didn't want her to feel pressured, so I reached out to take the plants back and said, "You know what? If you're not happy, let's just call this off. I'd rather keep them than sell you something you don't want." She jerked the box back and snapped, "No, I guess I'll keep them." Then she smirked and said, "I only have $5. Keep in mind, she had specifically asked for $10 worth of plants. Now she wanted all of them for half the price. I smiled politely and said, "That's fine." She looked pleased, but then I added, "So which 5 do you want?" She froze, staring at me like I had just spoken another language. "What? I cut in with the same calm smile. "They're $1 each. So which 5 plants do you want?" She glared at me before finally saying, "I guess I'll take the largest 5. I pulled out the smaller ones and left her with 5 plants for her $5. I figured that was the end of it. But then she asked again, "You don't have anything else? Nothing at all?" I remembered one small begonia I had put aside and asked if she wanted to see it. I told her it was also $1. Of course, she said yes, even though she had just finished telling me she had no more money. I brought it out, and she immediately snatched it from me, complained about the size, and dropped it right into her box. That's when I reached in and pulled it back out. She gasped and demanded, "What are you doing?" I counted out loud, pointing to each plant in her box. "You gave me $5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plants. That's what $5 gets you." She sputtered in outrage, then tried one last time to intimidate me. "I'm going to tell Amy how terrible you are." I just smiled, pointed toward the driveway, and told her that was the fastest way back to the highway. She stomped off, clutching her 5 plants like she'd been robbed. To this day, I have no idea who this Amy person is, but apparently she's the self-appointed guardian of all plant sales in the area. That's the end of this story. That whole thing is hilarious in the most frustrating way. Like, she showed up acting like she was at a garden center, not someone's driveway. The funniest part is how proud she probably felt trying to bargain, only to get cut down by basic math. And this mysterious Amy she kept mentioning almost sounds like some local plant cult leader. This next story is about a woman whose longtime friend suddenly confessed he thought he deserved to be with her, only for things to spiral after she gave him a blunt and honest response. So yesterday, one of my closest friends, let's call him Mark, asked me to meet him for lunch. We've known each other for about 10 years, so when he said he had something important to discuss, I figured it was serious. I had some free time, so I agreed and headed over. When I arrived, Mark was already there. We ordered lunch, sat down, and at first everything was lighthearted. We talked about random stuff, just like we usually did. But then he cleared his throat, and I could tell he was about to shift into something heavier. That's when he hit me with it. He told me he didn't understand why I was dating my current boyfriend, because according to him, he was a better match for me. I sat there stunned for a moment, not sure I'd heard him right, so I asked him to explain. Mark went on this long rant about how he liked me first, how he met me before my boyfriend did, and that somehow meant he should have been the one I chose. Then he started stacking up what he thought were his advantages. He told me he was more good-looking, taller, more successful, and that he knew me better. The successful part was especially off, because honestly, it's not true. My boyfriend works hard and actually earns his way. Mark, on the other hand, has his entire life bankrolled by his parents. But the way he said it, he really seemed to believe he was the better option simply by existing in my orbit all these years. Then he said something that really made me pause. He told me he couldn't understand how I could be with someone else when he'd always been waiting for me, like it was some kind of line I was supposed to find romantic. I just sat there for a second, letting it sink in, before I asked him directly if he wanted me to be honest. He said yes, so I laid it out. I told him flat out that I would never want to date him because of the way I've seen him treat his past girlfriends. He ghosts them whenever he feels like it, only to pop back in and expect them to be waiting for him. I told him I found that immature and irresponsible, and that dating him would feel exhausting. I also explained that over time, watching him treat women that way was part of why I had slowly started putting distance between us. I didn't like it, and it had changed the way I saw him. When I finished, he didn't argue. He just went quiet. Then he mumbled something about having to go, got up, and left. I went home afterward and carried on with my day, not really sure what would come of it. Later that evening, though, I started getting messages from our mutual friends. They asked me what I had done to Mark, saying he was a total wreck after meeting me. Apparently, he was out drinking and refusing to tell anyone what had happened. I explained to them what had actually gone down. I told them he confessed his feelings, and I told him honestly why I didn't feel the same way. But instead of understanding, some of them turned it back on me. They said I'd been too harsh, that I broke him, and that I could have let him down easier. From my perspective, though, I wasn't cruel. I didn't insult him or make a scene. I just told the truth. The same truth I've been holding back for years. I think he needed to hear it, even if it stung. That's where the story ends. That one's tough, but honestly kind of telling too. Sometimes when someone asks for honesty, they don't really want it. They just want validation. The way his friends are reacting makes it sound like they're seeing the drama secondhand and not the full picture. It's never easy being the one to say what everyone else avoids saying, but it usually ends up being the most real thing in the long run. This next story is about a woman who finally stood up to her boss after years of being underpaid, only for him to admit he knew he was taking advantage of her the whole time. My mom had been working for this small local firm for about 8 years. To give you an idea of how dedicated she was, she practically ran the place. She kept the office together, handled problems before they reached the owner, and kept the business flowing smoothly. Meanwhile, the owner himself spent his money on flashy cars, a new Porsche every year, without fail, while paying her barely enough to scrape by. For years, my family had been telling her she was underpaid. We could all see it, but my mom has always been the kind of person who doesn't like to rock the boat. She thought being loyal and working hard would eventually be recognized. It never was. Outside of the occasional inconsistent bonus, her salary barely moved. Finally, after enough encouragement, she decided she'd had enough. Quietly, without telling her boss, she started applying elsewhere. She found an opening at a larger regional competitor. On paper, she didn't check every box. They listed a degree requirement she didn't have, but her years of real, proven experience carried her through. She went through a couple rounds of interviews, and before long, they made her an offer. And the offer wasn't just good, it was life-changing. They were willing to pay her $110,000 a year, up from the $60,000 she had been stuck at, almost double. On top of that, it came with full benefits, real benefits she hadn't had before. Health, retirement, stability. She couldn't believe it. After years of being undervalued, someone had finally looked at her work and said, "You're worth it." When she told us, we were over the moon. But the real drama came when she handed in her notice. Her boss absolutely lost it. He started blowing up her phone, calling her constantly with counteroffers and promises he couldn't possibly keep. One day it was, "We'll promote you." The next, "We'll give you bonuses." He was scrambling to keep her because deep down he knew the truth. She had been the one holding his business together all along. The wildest part came during one of these conversations. He was desperate, so he offered to beat the new company's salary. And then, with a straight face, he told her, "I know I wasn't paying you what you were actually worth to me." Just imagine hearing that after nearly a decade of loyalty, admitting out loud that he knew he was underpaying her. All those years when she was a single mom raising 2 kids, stressing about bills, trying to keep everything together. And he knew. He knew, and he chose to keep her struggling while he drove his brand new Porsche around town. The audacity floored her. It floored all of us. But the difference this time was, she had options. She didn't need to settle for empty promises anymore. She turned him down flat and walked away from that toxic situation with her head held high. I can't even describe how proud I am of her. She gave that company everything for 8 years, and when they refused to value her, she found someone who would. It's such a good reminder that not every small company is filled with good people. Sometimes it just means they think they can get away with paying you less. That story wraps up here. That's such a satisfying outcome. Watching someone finally get recognized for what they've been worth all along feels good, especially when the old boss exposes himself like that. It's wild how many people think loyalty means settling, when in reality, loyalty should go both ways. And honestly, seeing her land somewhere that values her so much more probably feels like breathing for the first time in years. This next story is about a student whose professor publicly mocked them during a test, only to be left embarrassed when the truth came out. For a little background, I'm hard of hearing. Not to the point where I need hearing aids just yet, but enough that it can get in the way sometimes. especially in loud or echoey places. At my university, most of our big lectures, tests, and finals were held in these old auditoriums. The acoustics in those rooms were terrible. The sound bounced around, making it hard for me to catch everything professors were saying. Because of that, I made it a point to let my professors know ahead of time, usually at the start of the year, that I might need things repeated now and then. That way they wouldn't assume I was zoning out or ignoring them if I asked. It was exam season, one of those long, exhausting stretches where it feels like your whole life is just back-to-back studying and tests. On this particular day, we had an exam scheduled after a full day of classes. By the time we walked into the auditorium, everyone was already tired and cranky. The professor in charge was known for being strict and short-tempered. She didn't exactly have a reputation for patience, so everyone usually tried to stay out of her way. As soon as we stepped into the room, she started shouting directions at us. She was trying to tell us where to put our backpacks and personal belongings before we sat down, but her voice was echoing all over the place. To give you an idea, the usual setup during exams was that we had to pile our backpacks on one side of the room and only bring a pen to our desk. Then, after the test, we'd go collect our things. Very old school, very strict. But with the echo and her yelling, I couldn't make out exactly where she was telling us to put our stuff, so I just paused for a second. I tried watching where other students were going, figuring if I followed their lead, I'd end up in the right spot. I thought that would be the easiest way not to cause a fuss, but apparently she noticed me standing there and not moving fast enough for her liking. Suddenly, she turned bright red and screamed across the room at me. "Bring your backpack to the front. What are you, deaf?" The words hit like a slap. The entire room went dead silent. Dozens of students stopped what they were doing and turned to look. All eyes were on me. My heart jumped, but instead of shrinking, I just said it plainly. "Yes, I actually am. I told you this at the beginning of the year." My voice wasn't angry. I kept it calm and clear, but loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. The effect was instant. Her face drained of color, then turned bright red again, and she stumbled over her words. She muttered something about bringing the backpack to the front and quickly looked away. Meanwhile, my best friend, sitting just a couple of rows away, had to literally bite her finger to keep from bursting out laughing and getting herself kicked out. Even the assistant professor couldn't hold back completely. She covered her mouth with her hand to hide a chuckle and actually gave me a quick wink. That was enough to make me feel like at least someone in the room had my back. After the exam, when I went to the front to hand in my test and pick up my bag, the professor looked down at her shoes and muttered an apology. She wouldn't look me in the eye. The grin on the assistant professor's face made it clear this was not something the main professor did often. It was like watching a moment she'd been waiting for. From that point on, for the rest of the year, that professor never once looked me directly in the eye again. It was as if the memory embarrassed her too much to even acknowledge me. And honestly, I was perfectly fine with that. That's where this story ends. That's one of those moments where the comeback isn't even planned. It just lands perfectly. I can imagine how awkward that silence must have felt for the professor after the whole class heard it. There's something funny about how quickly people fold when they get called out for being careless with their words. And honestly, I like that the assistant professor couldn't even hide her reaction. It makes the whole thing feel like a small win in the middle of exam stress. This next story is about a longtime friendship that fell apart after a woman discovered her best friend's husband snooping through her phone while she wasn't there. For some background, my best friend and I had been inseparable for years. We'd known each other since we were little, went through high school together, and stuck by each other through every high and low. She was someone I truly thought would always be in my life. I was even her maid-of-honor at her wedding, and at one point we got matching tattoos together. That's how close we were. To make things even more layered, I had been friends with her husband before the two of them ever got together. I respected their relationship and always kept my bond with him in that friendly, supportive lane. In fact, I considered him one of my best friends too. That's why what happened next blindsided me and left me feeling completely betrayed. One day, she and I decided to go for a long walk. A new grocery store had opened in our small town, and believe it or not, that was exciting for us. Small towns don't get new places often, so this was like a little event. Since I like to unplug when I'm spending time with her, I left my phone at her house. About halfway through our walk, her husband called her. He said that my phone alarm was going off back at the house. I thought that was weird since I didn't have any alarm set, but I didn't think too much of it. He asked for my passcode so he could shut it off, and since I trusted both of them completely, I gave it to her to pass along. By the time we got back, it had been about 3.5 hours. I checked my phone and sure enough, the alarm app was open in the background, which made sense since he had gone in to turn it off. But here's the thing, my phone wasn't left on that app. It was sitting on a completely different screen, my homepage. Now this may not sound like much, but I have this little OCD tendency where I always swipe back to my homepage before I lock my phone. Always. If I forget, I'll unlock my phone just to swipe to the homepage before locking it again. It's a routine that's basically muscle memory for me. So I immediately noticed something was off. Then I saw that I had missed a call from my boyfriend and a bunch of Snapchat notifications from a work friend's group chat. I asked her husband if that was the alarm he heard, and he avoided eye contact. He just kind of shrugged and vaguely said, "I don't know, it was just some alarm sound." Something about his tone set off alarms in my head, the real kind. Later that night, when I was telling my roommate about what happened, she suggested checking my screen time history. That's when things got really unsettling. According to screen time, while I was gone, my phone had been open on Snapchat for about 15 minutes, in my photos for another 15 minutes, in Google Photos for 10 minutes, and in my text messages for around 5 minutes. Meanwhile, the clock app, the one he supposedly went in to shut off an alarm, showed only 15 seconds. For anyone who doesn't know, screen time doesn't just log apps that get notifications in the background. It only records active use when the app is open on the screen, which meant he wasn't just clicking into them by accident. He had been actively using them, looking through them. I confronted my best friend about all of this. At first, she seemed willing to hear me out, but then she went to her husband for his side of the story. That's when the excuses started rolling in. He said he only opened the apps with notifications and closed them without looking. Then he changed it to say he was just trying to silence things. But none of his explanations made sense, and none of them explained why he was in my photos, which don't have alarms or notifications at all. When I pressed harder and showed her the screen time evidence, her response crushed me. She said, "Do you have proof he went through your photos? I just don't understand why you're so adamant that he's lying." I couldn't believe it. I had laid out the facts, and she was still defending him. After that, I told her I needed space. It's now been 3 months since I've spoken to either of them. I had to change my phone number recently because of unrelated issues, so she wouldn't even be able to reach out now if she wanted to. My boyfriend wants absolutely nothing to do with them. He's convinced her husband was snooping for private pictures, and honestly, I can't say I disagree. He thinks it's best we leave that friendship in the past, and that's where I am now. Heartbroken, betrayed, and stuck wondering whether I should even bother trying to repair something that feels so broken, or just cut my losses and move on. That's where this story finishes. That's a rough situation to be in, especially with a friendship that deep. What makes it sting more is how small details, like screen time logs, end up exposing things people thought they could hide. It's one of those moments that shows how trust can get broken in an instant, even after years of loyalty. And honestly, when someone chooses denial over facing the truth, it makes it even harder to see a way back. This next story is about a neighborhood fed up with one family's non-stop loud music, leading to a hilarious and unexpected sound battle that brought everyone else closer together. I live in a small town, tucked away in one of those quiet neighborhoods where most people just mind their business. The houses aren't crammed together, but they're not far apart either. We all kind of know each other, enough to wave hello and step in if there's an emergency, but otherwise it's a very live and let live kind of place. You stay on your side, I'll stay on mine, and everyone's happy. It's also a very multicultural neighborhood, which I've always thought was one of the best things about it. You get this mix of backgrounds, languages, and little traditions that you catch glimpses of here and there. Normally it makes the area feel unique and welcoming. But a few months ago, a new family moved in, and things changed fast. At first it was standard. People stopped by to welcome them, offered help settling in, all that. They weren't openly hostile, but they were different. Cold, kind of rude. Like, they didn't really want to be bothered. That would have been fine, except it didn't stop there. Pretty quickly, their kids started treating the neighborhood like their personal playground. I'm talking about hide-and-seek games at midnight, doorbell ditching like it was a full-time job, and running wild without much supervision. On top of that, they seemed to collect cars like they were Pokemon. Cars parked everywhere, blocking people in, and one time they even blocked a school bus. The noise didn't stop at the cars though, because then came the music. When I say music, I don't mean the occasional backyard barbecue playlist. I mean all day, every day, at levels that made me feel like I was living across from a stadium. And the worst part wasn't the volume, it was the actual music itself. Imagine being forced to listen to the same handful of bubblegum pop songs on repeat, mix in 2 VeggieTales tracks, roll into some Kids Bop nightmares, and then start the whole cycle over. That's what it was like. The same 15 or so songs, blasting on loop, day after day. At first, neighbors tried being nice about it. Some of us had friendly conversations with them. Others called the police, who came by a couple of times. None of it changed anything. The music kept on going, like clockwork. After a while, I think we all just silently bonded over our shared frustration. Then, about 5 days ago, something incredible happened. The usual VeggieTales rotation started up in the morning, loud as ever. But then, faintly in the background, I heard something else. Polka music. And not just polka, but the loudest, most determined Oompa band you can imagine, blasting from 2 houses down. It was so unexpected that I actually laughed out loud. And that was just the beginning. The bubblegum pop got louder, then the polka came back even stronger. After about an hour of this back and forth, another neighbor joined in. An auntie from the other side of the street started blasting her Hispanic cleaning music, the kind you can almost smell the pine cleaner to. Suddenly, we had a full-blown neighborhood sound battle going on. To paint the picture, I was standing in my yard right at the southern point of this whole thing. The new family, with their endless veggie tales, was blasting from the center. Polka was booming from the east. Angry Auntie had the west covered. And to the north, like fate itself wanted in, trains started rolling through the nearby tracks. 5 crossings within 3 blocks. Horns blaring. It was chaos. It was glorious. I couldn't help but laugh, and I had to call my husband to tell him what was happening. While I was narrating it, he cut me off and said, "Doesn't your stereo still work?" And that's when it hit me. Oh, it was time to contribute. I hauled my big stereo out of the living room, wrestled it on top of my truck, ran an extension cord, and fired it up. The first song I chose was Flying Whales by Gojira, blasting so loud the ground felt like it was vibrating. Then I switched it to Bluetooth and started running a rotation. Korpiklani, Fawn, Sabaton, Oomph, Iron Maiden. It became this insane multicultural music showdown, everyone throwing in their own sounds, like some chaotic symphony. We kept it going for 4 straight hours. People were laughing, doing yard work to their chosen battle tracks. And honestly, it was the most connected I'd felt to my neighbors in a long time. The funniest part? Ever since that day, the neighborhood has been quiet. We're on day 6 now. The family is still home, but their speakers haven't come back on. It's peaceful again, and as a bonus, I actually got to know some of my neighbors better because of that ridiculous sound war. That's the end of this story. That whole thing sounds like the most entertaining way possible for a neighborhood to come together. It's funny how shared frustration can turn into something almost fun when people get creative about it. Honestly, a 4-hour music battle with that mix of genres must have felt surreal but also kind of epic in its own right. And it's wild how the quiet afterwards probably felt like the sweetest victory. This next story is about a host who discovered one of their guests secretly borrowed a book during their stay, only to mail it back weeks later with an unexpected note. I rent out a space in my home that has its own private entrance but still connects to the rest of the house. I've been hosting for a while, and I've earned superhost status, which just means I try to keep things professional and comfortable for anyone who books. Most of my guests are business travelers, since I live in a big city close to an international airport, so usually it's quiet and uneventful. Honestly, I rarely even have much direct contact with people who stay. One time though, I had a woman book the space for herself and her husband. From the moment they arrived, I noticed something a little different. Even though their rental was on the lower level, I could still hear them bickering now and then. Nothing extreme, no yelling or anything like that. More like those hushed, tense arguments couples sometimes have when they're trying not to draw attention but can't quite hold it in. What stood out more was their routine. Instead of heading out together each day, they seemed to alternate. One would leave the house alone while the other stayed behind. Then, in the evenings, when the one who went out returned, the quiet arguments would start back up again. It wasn't disruptive enough to be a problem, but it was something I couldn't help but notice in the background. Down on their level of the house, there's a rec room. It's got a pool table I don't really use anymore, and along one wall, there's a bookshelf with a random collection of books I've picked up over the years. Most of them I don't even think about anymore, but I like having them there. It makes the space feel cozy and gives guests something to flip through if they're bored. Their stay went fine overall. They didn't cause any damage, and they weren't loud or disrespectful. Aside from the low-level bickering, they actually seemed to be trying hard not to bother me. I decided not to make anything of it. When they left, the place was clean, and they even left me a kind review. I pretty much put them out of my mind after that. Fast forward about 3 weeks later. I get this package in the mail, and at first I don't recognize the return address. I open it up, and inside is a book I honestly had forgotten I even owned. It was called Why Men Love Bitches. I had bought it back in my early 20s and never really thought about it since. I'll admit I cringed a little seeing it again, because it's one of those titles that makes you laugh and feel slightly embarrassed at the same time. But what really surprised me was the note tucked inside. It was from the woman who had stayed with her husband. She wrote, "Thanks for your kindness and for this read. I didn't mean to take it, but once I started it at your house, I wanted to finish it as soon as possible, and I was embarrassed to ask. I didn't want to steal it, so I just borrowed it. It helped. Love, Guest." I just sat there for a second, smiling at how unexpected the whole thing was. She had apparently picked the book up during their stay, gotten hooked on it, and couldn't put it down. Instead of asking if she could borrow it, she slipped it into her things and took it with her, probably meaning to mail it back once she was done. And true to her word, she did. As a woman in my 30s now, I wouldn't exactly recommend that book to anyone. It's one of those self-help titles that feels more like a time capsule than solid advice. But still, the fact that she found it helpful in that moment was kind of sweet, and the whole situation ended up making me laugh more than anything. Out of all my hosting experiences, that's definitely one I won't forget. Part of me hopes that little borrowed book really did make some kind of difference for them. That story wraps up here. That's one of those quirky little stories that sticks with you. It's funny how something as small as a random old book on a shelf can end up playing a part in someone else's life. Honestly, the fact that she mailed it back with a note makes it even better, because most people wouldn't bother, and it kind of shows how the most unexpected moments are what make things memorable. This next story is about a homeowner who turned the tables on a power-hungry HOA board after they unfairly targeted him with petty fines. When I first bought my house, I was honestly excited. It was my first real step into owning property, and I felt proud of the choice I made. The neighborhood wasn't too big, somewhere between 500 and 1,000 homes, and one of the reasons I picked it was because the HOA seemed easygoing. They had the lowest dues in the whole city, barely any rules, and it let me buy a house that was nicer than anything else I could have afforded at the time. I figured, perfect. But then, not even a month into living there, I got slapped with my first violation notice. 2 violations, actually. The first said my lawn wasn't green enough, and the second said my trash cans were too close to my driveway. Now, keep in mind, this was February, middle of winter. Nobody's lawn was green. Mine looked just like everyone else's. As for the trash cans, I kept them on the side of my house. Maybe they stuck out a foot past the wall, but still, it was hardly an eyesore. I figured it must have been a mistake, maybe even a leftover complaint from the previous owner. I shrugged it off and didn't think much of it. Then March rolled around, and I got another notice. This one wasn't just a warning, it was a fine. They wanted $100 for each violation, and I had 2 weeks to pay up. I was furious. It made no sense at all, and I wasn't about to hand over money for something this ridiculous. So I called the management company that worked with the board to get some answers. The woman on the phone told me if I wanted to fight it, I had to show up at the annual HOA meeting and appeal directly to the board. Fine, I'd do it. When I got to the meeting, I started chatting with a few neighbors before things officially began. Pretty quickly, I realized I wasn't alone. A bunch of them were there for the same reason. Petty violations, crazy fines, just plain nonsense. Then I went up to one of the board members, an older guy with gray hair who looked perpetually angry, and asked how I could appeal my fines. He listened and then said flat out, "And you should get fined for that. Young people like you not taking care of their homes is the whole reason I got on this board." The condescension in his voice lit a fire under me. Then the meeting started. And that's when I learned something important. Since it was the annual meeting, they'd be voting on 3 out of the 5 board seats. Anyone could nominate themselves. That's when it hit me. If they wanted to play games with me, maybe I could play one right back. When the time came, I nominated myself. I gave this speech about how HOAs weren't supposed to exist to squeeze money out of people, but to help build a sense of community. The crowd loved it. When the votes came in, I won by a landslide. The board looked visibly annoyed. I could almost see them grinding their teeth as I shook hands and took a seat. After the meeting, I appealed my violations again. They dropped the trash can fine, but still held me to the lawn violation. Apparently, because I had weeds that had turned yellow after I sprayed them, that was enough for a technicality. I ended up losing $100, but honestly, I was already thinking about the long game. Being on the board gave me access to all kinds of records and conversations. They made me secretary, which meant I had to take notes and sit quietly while the president and VP tried to push through new rules. They even told me I wasn't allowed to propose new policies, which, by the way, wasn't even allowed under their own bylaws. But that didn't stop me from voting against everything I thought was unnecessary. And while I was doing that, I was also taking notes, watching, waiting. The first real opportunity came when the president tried to pass a policy that would fine people for having flowers that weren't neutral colors. She didn't like that her neighbor had turquoise flowers, so she wanted to weaponize the HOA against them. That was my opening. I rallied the other board members through our Slack messages, pointing out how ridiculous and personal this policy was. Eventually, we called a meeting, and the rest of the board voted her out. Just like that, she was gone. 1 down. I got one of my neighbors to take her spot. Someone I knew would be on my side. From there, I set my sights on the treasurer and the director. They weren't mean, just weak, easily swayed. So I created a fake account on Nextdoor and started stirring the pot whenever new violation letters went out. People would post their frustrations, and I'd reply, "Oh, that's the treasurer's doing," or "You should bring that up with the director." By the next HOA meeting, the room was packed with angry homeowners ready to call them out. They crumbled under the pressure and resigned. 2 more down. That left just one, the VP, who had now become the president. He was the same angry man who had insulted me in the beginning. He fought hard, always trying to push new rules, but with 4 out of 5 of us against him, he kept getting blocked. He stayed on, though, refusing to resign. I couldn't shake him until the new management company came in. With them, everything was more transparent. They gave us clean records, including fines. And that's when I saw it. His name. Our president owed around $10,000 in unpaid fines. For years, the old management company had been covering for him, but now it was all in black and white. Our bylaws said that if a homeowner owed more than $3,000 in unpaid fines, the board could vote to foreclose on their house. That power shocked me, but I wasn't about to let it slide. I double-checked the numbers with the management company, and they confirmed it. Then I called an emergency board meeting. I presented the evidence, and we voted. 4 to 1, we agreed to start the foreclosure process. The president erupted in anger, cursed, and stormed out of the room. A few days later, he resigned, paid his fines, and put his house up for sale. While I didn't get to see the foreclosure through, it didn't matter. He was gone. The board was finally flipped, and I became president. Since then, I've relaxed the rules, lowered the maximum fines, and made it possible for anyone to appeal online. Grass fines don't even start until May, and trash can violations are barely enforced, all because they thought they could bully me with a couple of petty fines. That's the end of this story. That was wild from start to finish. It's kind of amazing how a small fight over weeds and trash cans spiraled into a complete takeover of the board. Honestly, it shows how much persistence can shift the balance of power when people team up. And I have to admit, the way the storyteller used patience and strategy instead of just yelling back was pretty satisfying to hear. This next story is about a student teacher who was mistaken for a middle school camper by an entitled parent, leading to a heated confrontation in front of everyone. I've been student teaching this spring in a 6th grade class, and while it's been stressful, it's also been a really good experience. From the very first day, the teachers I worked with treated me like a colleague, not just some kid tagging along. That meant a lot to me. especially because I have a very baby-faced look. People don't always realize I'm in my 20s. Luckily, the kids already respected me because I had subbed for them last year. So we had a solid relationship. Now fast forward to this week. We went on a big camping trip with 4 different classes. Even though I technically finished student teaching already, my mentor teacher invited me to come along as part of the staff. She said it would be good experience, and I was excited for it. My main responsibility was pretty simple: hang out in the medical lodge and make sure kids got their daily medication. Compared to running a classroom, it was a breeze. Plus, the kids were excited to see me, which made me feel like I was really part of the team. We all arrived at camp, and I rode in on the bus with my teacher while some of the other teachers and parents drove cars full of luggage. When we got off the bus, the teachers were heading to a meeting with the camp director and counselors. I stopped for just a second to fill up my water bottle before joining them. That's when it happened. As I'm finishing up, a mom walks right up to me with this serious look. Before I can even greet her, she says, "You can't wear that." At first I thought I misheard her. "Excuse me?" She doubles down. "Young lady, that is so inappropriate for a school setting. You're going to distract my son and all the other boys. You need to change as soon as we get to our cabins." For reference, I was wearing jeans, a black undershirt, and a tank top with thick straps. The undershirt kept everything covered. Nothing revealing. Nothing inappropriate. And on top of that, it was over 100 degrees outside. Tank tops were about the most reasonable thing anyone could wear. I let out a small laugh, because I honestly thought this had to be a misunderstanding. We'd both laugh off later. Nope. That chuckle lit a fire under her. "Don't you dare laugh. I'm serious. Who is your teacher? You are so disrespectful. No wonder you're dressed like that." Trying to get the boys' attention, I bet. At that point, I put on my calmest professional smile, the kind you use when you're dealing with a difficult parent. "Whose parent are you?" I asked. She told me her son's name. He was from another class and had a bit of a reputation as a troublemaker. So I said, "Mrs. EM, I don't know if you're aware of this, but I'm not a student. I'm a teacher. And the camp's dress code allows my students to wear tank tops, so do not ask them to change." That did not calm her down. "Now you're lying to me. Where is your teacher? I'm getting you sent home." Right then, another teacher, Mrs. A, walked over. She'd overheard the yelling and, funnily enough, she was also wearing a tank top. "Is there something you need, Miss OP?" she asked. I kept my voice level. "No, I was just introducing myself to Mrs. EM. She didn't know Mrs. T had a student teacher this year." Mrs. A smiled warmly. "Oh, Miss OP has been such an asset to all of us this semester. Your son actually had a few science lessons from her this year. She's going to be a great teacher." The mom's face went bright red. She didn't say much after that. Later that day, all the parents came down to the lodge for an orientation about the week ahead. My mentor teacher, Mrs. T, introduced me to the group as part of the teaching team. The parents were welcoming, and some even told me how much their kids loved having me in the classroom. Everyone seemed happy, except that one mom, who just sat there fuming. But the best part of the trip so far? At dinner, her son came running up to me, completely excited, and in front of his mom shouted, "Miss OP, can you teach 7th grade next year so you can be one of my teachers? I'm gonna miss you." I don't think I've ever seen a parent look so uncomfortable in my life. That's where this story ends. That's such a funny clash between appearances and reality. It's wild how quick some people are to assume the worst without stopping to think. The part where the kid complimented her right in front of his mom almost feels like perfect timing. And honestly, it's kind of nice knowing the other teachers had her back right away. This next story is about neighbors who started out friendly but quickly crossed boundaries, from demanding dog sleepovers to causing property damage. When my neighbors first moved into the townhouse next to us, everything seemed great. They had kids who were sweet and polite. The parents were quirky but friendly, and it felt like they were just a normal, loving family moving into the community. We'd chat about home improvement, share a beer on occasion, and they even helped with things like installing a screen door. At the start, it really felt like we had lucked out with good neighbors. But after a few months, the red flags started creeping in. The first big one was around Halloween. We could hear constant banging and pounding noises coming from their side of the house. At first, my wife and I figured it was just the kids being rowdy and having fun. But then, out of nowhere, the father called me on the phone. He was crying, actually crying. about how upset he was that they hadn't been invited to a big Halloween party next door. The thing is, the family hosting that party has this open door rule with all the neighbors. Their standing policy is simple. If my garage door is open, you're welcome to come in and join. Everybody knew that. So for this grown man to break down over not being invited, when he absolutely could have just walked in like anyone else, was one of those moments where I started to realize they weren't quite what they seemed. Then things got even weirder. Their kids came up with the idea that our dog should have sleepovers at their house. At first we thought it was kinda cute. They liked walking him now and then, and we didn't see the harm. But after a while, it turned into something more serious. One day, when the kids were excitedly asking again about a doggy sleepover, their mom pulled me aside. She told me in this really stern tone that it was unfair we got to have the dog all week long. I just stood there for a second because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then she went further. She said that since I work shift work and get to spend a lot of time with the dog during the week, it only made sense that her family should get him on weekends. Like it was some kind of joint custody arrangement. I didn't even know how to respond to that. It wasn't just awkward, it was intrusive on a whole new level. The final straw came later on. One day we discovered a scratch on one of our cars. It wasn't deep, but it was obvious. We saw one of their kids nearby, and it was pretty clear the scratch had been an accident. We didn't want money, and we weren't looking to escalate things. We just wanted to let the parents know so maybe their kids would be more careful in the future. But when we brought it up, instead of apologizing, they told us to call the police if we had a problem. That was it. No acknowledgement, no responsibility, no willingness to even have a conversation. At that point, my wife and I realized the relationship was done. We stopped trying to be friendly neighbors and kept our distance after that. That's the end of this story. That one really shows how fast a neighborly relationship can unravel. It's wild how they went from friendly beers and conversations to demanding custody of the dog, like it was a kid in a divorce. The part about scratching the car and then telling them to call the cops, instead of just saying sorry, really sealed it. Sometimes keeping your distance ends up being the only option. This next story is about a parent who secretly filmed a coach recovering from surgery and tried to get them removed from the kids' sports program. Not long ago, I had to go through an emergency appendectomy. The surgery itself was rough, but the recovery was even harder. It wasn't just about resting and healing physically. It also forced me to step back from everything that made me feel like myself. I've always been active, always identified with being healthy, moving, running, coaching. Suddenly, I couldn't do any of that, and I felt kind of lost. For a while, even when the doctors cleared me to move again, I couldn't shake the anxiety. I kept thinking, you're slower than you used to be. Your technique isn't as sharp. You don't fit in anymore. It messed with my head. I avoided public places to train because I didn't want anyone to watch me struggle. But eventually, I knew I had to face it. The only way to get back into shape was to actually start training again. So I began running again at the local track. At first it was just slow laps. Gradually I added a little more speed, then sprints, then some light bodyweight training. Most of the time I zoned out with my headphones on, not paying much attention to anyone else. I told myself no one cared what I was doing. My friends reassured me too. They said all the worries were in my head. Turns out they weren't. Someone was watching me. And worse, they were judging me. It all came crashing down on a Friday. I was setting up for practice at the kids program where I coach when the head coach pulled me aside. He said a parent had a complaint and wanted to meet. The parent was someone I didn't know well. Let's just call her Karen. At first I figured it was something typical, like wanting her kid to play a certain position or start more games. But when I walked into the office, Karen had something else entirely. She had a video of me running. She had filmed it from the stands while her kid was out on the track. She sat there, showing it to my boss, pointing out how slow I looked and claiming I was out of shape. I can't even describe how horrifying that felt. It's one thing to be insecure in your own head. It's another to see a stranger literally filming your weakest moments to use against you, and then she doubled down. She said her 8-year-old son had lapped me on the track, and if coaches couldn't physically outperform the kids, then what example were we setting? She was insisting the program replace me with a healthy coach. Now my boss knew about my situation. He knew why I'd been gone, why I was still easing back into things. But he kept that private, which I respected. He calmly told her that my abilities weren't her concern, that the staff was fully managed, and that her son wouldn't be impacted. He was professional but firm. Karen wasn't satisfied. She started speculating about how my time off was connected to being out of shape. She even pushed the idea that maybe I should be furloughed until I was fully back to normal. That stung because technically she wasn't wrong. It was because of my health, but it wasn't her business, and it definitely wasn't her place to say I didn't belong. At one point, I stepped in. I thought maybe if I just explained, maybe if I was honest, she'd realize how cruel she was being. So I told her I'd had surgery, that I was recovering. I thought it might shut her down, but she just turned back to my boss and said, "All the more reason to bring in someone else in the meantime." That was the moment I knew nothing I said would matter. But thankfully, my boss didn't budge. He told her again, firmly, that the staff's health and training were not up for parental oversight. He also told her he was the owner and founder of the program, so there was no higher authority to take her complaints to. Karen wasn't happy. She threatened to stop recommending the program to other parents, which honestly was a pretty empty threat. My boss just let her talk until she ran out of steam. Then, right as she was about to leave, he stopped her. He told her point blank that if she was ever caught surveilling or harassing staff again, she would be permanently banned from all games, practices, and team events. No warnings, no exceptions. That part, hearing him back me up like that, was incredibly reassuring. I can't say it erased the sting of seeing that video, or the embarrassment of knowing someone had been watching me struggle, but at least I knew the rest of the staff had my back. So we left that office, went out to the field, and ran a great practice with the kids. Karen stormed off, still fussing, but at the end of the day, she was the one left in the dust. That's where this story ends. That must have been surreal, knowing a parent was secretly filming them just to complain. What really stands out, though, is how solid the boss was. Calm, firm, and protective. It's good when leadership makes it clear that boundaries matter, and staff won't be thrown under the bus. Honestly, Karen just ended up making herself look ridiculous. This next story is about a new server who was publicly humiliated by a customer, only for the restaurant owner to step in and shut it down. On my very first day working at a pizza restaurant, I got thrown into the deep end. This wasn't some quiet little place either. It was always packed, the kind of restaurant where the moment one table clears, another is waiting at the door. Up until then, I'd only worked at places that were either overstaffed or a little slower paced. So this was where I really learned what it meant to handle pressure and be a good server. That day I had about 10 tables at once. Normally I was used to juggling maybe 3 or 4 at a time. The place was buzzing, dishes clattering, people talking over each other, and me trying to keep every order straight in my head. Despite the chaos, I was holding my own. My trays were balanced, the drinks were refilled, the pizzas were getting out on time. Honestly, I felt like I was killing it for a first shift. Then came table 24. I'll never forget them. An older couple, both of them gray-haired and dressed up like they were going to a fine dining restaurant, not a casual pizza joint. They carried themselves with this air of formality, like they expected a white tablecloth and crystal glasses instead of greasy menus and pitchers of soda. Still, I treated them with care. I made sure their order was perfect, checked in on them regularly, and did everything I could to give them the kind of service they seemed to expect. By the time they were ready to leave, I actually felt proud of how I'd handled them, considering how swamped I was with the rest of my tables. That's when things went sideways. The man at table 24 handed me his credit card so I could close out their bill. I rushed to the computer, swiped it, and processed the payment. In my hurry, though, I made one small mistake. I forgot to print the itemized receipt. Normally, that's an easy fix. I could have just hit print and been done with it, but I didn't even get the chance. Instead of simply asking me for it, the man raised his voice. And not just a little. He was loud. His deep, firm tone carried across the whole restaurant. He started tearing into me right there in front of everyone. He called me horrible at my job, told me it was no wonder I was only working at a pizza place, and just kept going with this stream of insults that felt sharper with every word. I tried to walk away to grab the receipt and smooth things over, but he wouldn't let me. He kept talking over me, keeping me pinned there while all my other tables sat and watched the scene unfold. Every second I stood there being berated, I fell further behind. I could feel the stress building in my chest, like I couldn't breathe properly. Then something shifted. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the owner walk in. He must have arrived at just the right moment because he immediately clocked what was happening. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight up to the table and looked the man dead in the eye. "Excuse me, sir," he said, calm but firm. "I'm the owner of this establishment. I'm not sure what the problem is here, and frankly, I don't care. What I do care about is you belittling my waitress. So I'm going to ask you and your wife to leave and not come back." The man at table 24 sputtered, "Fine, but you'll be losing our business." Without missing a beat, the owner replied, "I really don't care, and I don't want people like you in my restaurant anyway." Then he stood there, just stood, waiting, making it clear he wasn't going to walk away until they got up and left. And eventually they did. The room, which had gone so quiet during the yelling, seemed to breathe again. It was like the whole restaurant silently agreed the owner had just done something incredible. After they were gone, the owner came over to me. He looked me right in the eye and said, "Forget those people. You're doing a great job. I wouldn't have hired you if I didn't see potential in you. If anyone else talks to you like that, I want you to tell them to get out. I don't want their money." In that moment, I felt this huge weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't just some frazzled new server trying to prove myself. I was part of a team where the boss actually had my back. That's where the story ends. That's the kind of boss everyone hopes for, but rarely gets. Someone who values the people working for them more than a few dollars on a bill. Honestly, standing there and waiting for the couple to leave makes the whole thing even cooler. It's a reminder that sometimes the strongest move is just not putting up with nonsense. This next story is about a pushy relative who tried to dump her kids on family members for an international trip, no matter how many times she was told no. My boyfriend's cousin is one of those people who thinks the world revolves around her. She has 4 kids, each one a handful on their own, and together they're like a walking storm of noise and chaos. The real problem, though, is that she refuses to discipline them. Anytime they act up, she brushes it off with excuses like, "Oh, they're just kids," or "They have so much energy." And on top of that, she's been really judgmental toward me. She loves to throw in little jabs about how selfish I am for not having kids, as if I'm somehow depriving my boyfriend of the joys of parenthood. Because of her attitude, my boyfriend eventually cut ties with her. He just couldn't take the constant comments and the entitled behavior anymore. But a few days ago, we went back to his parents' house for their anniversary celebration, and of course, she was there. His dad encouraged him to try to mend bridges with her, so we decided to keep things polite. At first, it seemed to be going okay. We were making small talk, just trying to get through the evening without drama. Then my boyfriend casually mentioned that we were heading to Melbourne for a vacation. That's when her eyes lit up. She immediately started going on about how she and her husband hadn't gone anywhere since their honeymoon, and how hard it is raising 4 kids, and how nice it must be to have the luxury of a big trip. You could almost see the gears turning in her head. Sure enough, before long, my boyfriend, because he's generous and kind, offered to pay for a weekend getaway for her family at a resort in Mount Abu. It's a hill station in Rajasthan, beautiful and family-friendly. Honestly, it was such a thoughtful gesture, but instead of being grateful, she made a face and said, "That's nice, but why can't you just take us to Melbourne with you?" My boyfriend tried to stay calm. He explained that this was meant to be a trip for just the 2 of us, that we had friends to meet there, and that Mount Abu was a really wonderful option for her family. But she kept pushing. In this whiny, almost mocking tone, she said we were selfish for going on a big trip, while sticking them with what she called a cheap weekend getaway. Even his mom stepped in at that point, telling her she should just be grateful for the offer. But instead of backing down, she came up with what she clearly thought was a brilliant idea. She suggested that she and her husband go to Mount Abu, while we take her kids to Melbourne. I couldn't help myself. I just blurted out, "What?" because the audacity was unreal. She kept insisting it made sense, that her kids should get to spend time with their uncle, and that it would be good for everyone. My boyfriend shut it down immediately. He told her flat out that we were not taking her kids on our vacation, and he gave her one last chance. Either accept the Mount Abu offer or drop it. He even warned her that if she kept pushing, she'd lose the offer entirely. That finally shut her up, at least for the night. Dinner went on, her kids ran around causing chaos, but she kept quiet. I thought that was the end of it. But the next morning, just a few hours before we were supposed to leave, she showed up at our apartment with her kids in tow. I opened the door, completely confused, and asked if something was wrong. She smiled, like it was no big deal, and said, "I'm just here to drop the kids off. You're leaving tonight, right?" I was floored. I asked her if she'd hit her head on something, because we had made it crystal clear we weren't taking her kids. She tried to claim my boyfriend had called her later and agreed to it, which was an obvious lie. When I called her out, she got angry and started accusing us of breaking promises and being heartless for disappointing her kids. I called my boyfriend right then and there, put him on speaker, and explained what was happening. He didn't hold back. He chewed her out, told her she had officially lost the Mount Abu offer, and reminded her that this entitled behavior was exactly why he'd cut ties with her in the first place. She tried to argue, but he didn't let her. Eventually, she stormed off with her kids, and the whole thing ended with us just shaking our heads and laughing about how delusional she had to be to think her plan would ever work. That's the end of this story. That cousin really went above and beyond with the entitlement. Showing up at someone's door with kids packed and ready like it was already agreed to is next level. Honestly, it's almost funny in how over the top it is, but also kind of wild that she thought it would work. It's one of those moments again where you realize some people just don't understand boundaries at all. This next story is about a restaurant worker who expected a tough customer call but ended up with something much more emotional instead. Working in a busy restaurant, I've learned to dread certain types of phone calls. You know the ones I'm talking about? The calls that come after a takeout order goes wrong. Sometimes it's something small, like a woman who ordered steak but got chicken and just wants it fixed next time. Other times it's more extreme, like a guy who finds a single onion in his taco and acts like the world is ending, demanding everyone gets fired. Those calls always make my stomach sink, because you never know which way it's going to go. At my store, the usual procedure is to get a manager right away if a customer calls in with a complaint. But over time, I realized I actually handle those situations better than most of my managers. I can usually calm people down, keep things professional, and make sure they leave the conversation happier than they started. My managers knew this too, so they trusted me to take the calls when I was working. It was a Thursday evening, always one of our busiest nights because we run a burrito special. The place was packed. Customers filled the dining area, the kitchen was running full throttle, and Uber Eats drivers were constantly coming in and out picking up orders. If you've ever worked in a restaurant with delivery apps, you know how chaotic that can get. Drivers sometimes add comments to the orders too. Little extra requests that can make or break the experience for the customer. After a while, when the initial rush finally slowed down, I picked up one of the Uber orders. In the comments, this man had written, "Could you please add napkins and draw a smiley face on something to make me a little happy tonight?" That one simple request hit all of us in the heart. I showed the note to the other servers, and right away everyone wanted to help. Instead of just one little doodle, we went all out. We made over 50 notes. Some were jokes, some were silly drawings. Others were short, cheerful messages. A couple of us even wrote tiny stories. And on top of that, we slipped in an extra side of queso, just to brighten his night a little more. By the time the order left, we were smiling and laughing, hoping it would make him smile too. It felt good doing something kind, even for a stranger we'd never meet face to face. Later that night, just as I was about to clock out, another server came up to me. She said there was a man on the phone asking to speak to a manager, but all of the managers were tied up. She asked if I could take it. My heart sank a little. I thought, great, right before I leave, I have to deal with one of those angry customer calls. Still, I picked up the phone and tried to sound calm and professional. The man on the line introduced himself and said he was the one who had placed that Uber Eats order. I braced myself for a complaint, but instead he surprised me completely. He told me he just wanted to say thank you. He said all of the notes had touched him so deeply that he started crying when he opened the bag. And then, right there on the phone, he actually started crying again. I didn't even know what to say. My mind went blank, and all I could think to do was tell him how much we appreciated him, that we loved serving him, and that we hoped we could continue to brighten his week. Then he shared something even more personal. He explained that he hadn't been able to leave his house in years. His weekly splurge, his one treat, was ordering from our restaurant. It was the highlight of his week, and what we had done with those notes meant more to him than we could have imagined. I felt my eyes welling up as I listened. I quickly asked him to hold on and ran to get the other servers. I put the phone on speaker and said, "Hello from Chain Mexican Restaurant. We all just wanted to say have a great night." The whole team jumped in at once, voices overlapping. "Have a good night. Enjoy your burrito. We'll see you next week." The room filled with cheerful shouts, and you could hear his soft laugh through the phone, even as he sniffled back tears. When the others had finished, I took him off speaker. I told him that he wasn't just a valued customer anymore. He was now a friend of ours. I thanked him again before we said goodbye and hung up. A few minutes later, I sat in my car, just staring at the steering wheel, tears running down my own face. I couldn't stop thinking about this stranger, who had been so touched by something so small, and I hoped, more than anything, that we really did help him feel a little less alone that night. That's where this story ends. That one hit different. Sometimes it's the tiniest gestures that end up meaning the most to someone. I like how it flipped from a dreaded customer call into something that actually brought everyone closer. It's wild to think a stack of little notes and some queso could have that kind of impact. Makes you wonder how many small things we do that stick with people way longer than we realize. This next story is about a restaurant worker who had to step in when a regular customer started choking during a date, only to have the situation spiral with the date accusing them of doing harm. I've been in the restaurant world a long time. I'm 30 now, working toward my PhD, and I still serve full-time while managing at a Greek bistro I've been with since I was a teenager. I started bussing tables at 15, almost 16, and never left because the owners treat me like family. It's the kind of place where the regulars are known by name, and after so many years, the restaurant feels like a second home to me. One of our longtime regulars is a guy I'll call Andy. He works at a mattress store nearby and usually comes in for lunch. He's one of those people who always has a smile, always has a kind word, and has built a bit of a reputation with the staff as a favorite. Andy's a big guy, probably close to 400 pounds. But what really stands out about him is just how genuinely nice he is. A few months ago, Andy came in one evening, which was unusual since he normally only shows up during the day. He wasn't alone this time. He walked in with a woman who looked to be maybe 10 years older than him. It didn't take long for us to realize they were on a date. Right away, the owner's wife made sure he and his guest got our best table, and we even sent over a complimentary glass of champagne. We wanted to make him feel special since we all liked him so much. When it came time to order, Andy went with our meat platter. It's a huge spread, packed with different cuts and flavors. His date ordered a vegetarian platter. Things seemed to be going smoothly. I remember glancing over at one point and seeing them laughing, leaning toward each other, clearly enjoying themselves. But then, in an instant, everything changed. I heard this sharp gasp from his date, and when I turned my head, Andy's face was blue. His hands were clutching at his throat. My stomach dropped. I've been trained in first aid, and I knew what I was looking at. He was choking. I rushed over immediately and started the Heimlich maneuver. I was doing everything by the book. Thrust to force the obstruction out. The owner called 911 while I kept working, but as I was trying to save his life, his date completely lost it. Out of nowhere, she started hitting me with her purse, shouting in my face, "You're hurting him!" "I took first aid. That's not right!" she screamed. It was surreal. Andy couldn't breathe, and she was actively stopping me from helping him. The owner had to physically pull her back while she kept yelling. Meanwhile, I stayed locked in on Andy, focusing on what I had to do. Finally, after what felt like forever, the piece of steak shot out and Andy gasped for air. He was breathing again, but he sounded wheezy, so when the paramedics arrived, they checked him over right away. While they worked, his date kept going on, accusing me of hurting him, as if she hadn't just watched him nearly suffocate. The paramedics, though, shut that down quickly. They told her I'd saved his life, and that if I hadn't stepped in when I did, things could have turned out much worse. Andy was taken to the hospital just to be safe, and she threw me one last dirty look before leaving with him. I'll never forget the intensity of that moment. His face blue, her screaming, me trying to hold it all together while doing the right thing. 2 days later, Andy came back in for lunch with one of his coworkers. He thanked me over and over again, clearly emotional about it. Then he told me, very matter-of-factly, that the date with that woman had been their first, and definitely their last. Fast forward to more recently, Andy came in again, this time with his new girlfriend. She was warm, friendly, and seemed to genuinely enjoy the restaurant. Most importantly, she was kind to him. Watching him smile and relax with her after everything that happened before made all of us on staff feel relieved. That story wraps up here. That was a roller coaster. The image of someone trying to stop a life-saving maneuver blows my mind. I'm glad Andy's okay and that he realized right away that date wasn't worth sticking around for. It's also nice to hear he found someone better, because that whole experience sounded exhausting. Some people just really show you their true colors in a crisis. This next story is about a neighbor who repeatedly ignored a restraining order and ended up escalating things so far that the police had to get involved. I've had issues with my neighbor for a long time now. She's entitled, constantly crossing boundaries, and because of past incidents, I already have a restraining order against her. To give you some background, she's tried to send her sister and her sister's kids onto my property before, and she's made my life difficult in more ways than I can count. The restraining order wasn't something I ever wanted to file, but her behavior left me no choice. Luckily, I've already got security cameras all around my property. They're motion activated and send notifications to my phone whenever something unusual happens. Honestly, they've saved me a lot of stress. I don't have to guess or second guess if something happened. There's always proof. One evening, I came home from work and got a notification that my package was on the way. Since I like to be there when deliveries happen, especially with my neighbor's track record, I went outside to wait. Before long, the delivery truck pulled up. The driver knows me pretty well by now, so we chatted as I signed for the package. Out of nowhere, here comes my neighbor, storming over like she owns the street. She kept a bit of distance at first, but she was shouting demands. She pointed at my package and insisted that it was hers. The delivery driver calmly told her it wasn't, and that he couldn't hand it over to anyone but the intended recipient. Instead of dropping it, she doubled down, saying if he didn't give it to her, she'd just come over and grab it herself. I reminded her, point blank, that if she took another step toward me, she'd be breaking the restraining order. There's a set distance she's legally not allowed to cross. She didn't care. She marched right up and started screaming at me, saying, "Because of you, I'm separated from my husband and heading for divorce." I told her straight up that if she hadn't been acting the way she had all this time, her husband probably wouldn't have gotten sick of it. She finally stomped off back to her house, still fuming. After that little episode, I made sure to get the delivery driver's name and phone number. That way, if she tried anything, I'd have a witness to her breaking the order. Sure enough, I ended up calling the police. While I was outside a few minutes later, I heard her screaming at the top of her lungs, insisting she hadn't broken any restraining order. The next morning, I went to check my mailbox, and that's when I ran into her husband. He's not part of the restraining order, so we were able to talk. He told me the loud screaming I'd heard was her shouting at the police. Apparently, when they confronted her, she completely lost control. She assaulted an officer, resisted arrest, and was taken into custody for breaking the restraining order. She even tried calling her husband from jail to ask for bail money, but he refused to pay. Not long after, things moved quickly. She ended up in court, and the judge sentenced her to 1 year and 210 days in prison. That broke down to a year for assaulting the officer, 60 days for resisting arrest, and another 150 days for violating the restraining order. The judge also heard from her husband, who was officially filing for divorce. The plan now is that once she's released, she'll have to stay with her next of kin under an ankle monitor until the divorce trial finishes. It was a long road getting here, but watching her face consequences after so many warnings and so many chances, it was surreal. That's the end of this story. That whole situation escalated so fast, but honestly, it sounds like it was only a matter of time. Some people just keep pushing until they hit a wall, and in this case, the wall was the law. It's kind of wild that the husband finally reached his breaking point too, right in the middle of all that chaos. Hearing how it played out, I can see why the storyteller made sure to have cameras and witnesses. That was the only way to get through something this messy. This next story is about a boyfriend who surprised his girlfriend with concert tickets, only for her to choose to go with her best friend instead of him. My girlfriend and I are both 26, and we've been together for 3 years. She's a massive Taylor Swift fan, so when she found out Taylor was going to be performing at MetLife Stadium, right near where we live, she was beyond excited. I knew right away that this was something she would want to go to more than anything, so I decided I was going to surprise her. The day the tickets went on sale, I even called in sick to work so I could be ready for the Ticketmaster queue. I sat there staring at the screen for 2 hours, nervously waiting while the little loading bar crept forward. Finally, when my turn came up, I jumped on the seats as fast as I could. They were $400 each, and I grabbed two, one for her and one for me. That evening, when she came back from work, I was so excited to surprise her. I handed her the tickets, and she was absolutely ecstatic. She jumped up, hugged me, and kept saying how incredible it was. I was feeling pretty great about myself because I thought this was the perfect surprise. But then, when I mentioned how excited I was to go with her, her whole reaction shifted. She looked confused and told me she thought the 2 tickets were for her and her best friend, who's also a huge Taylor Swift fan. That hit me harder than I expected. In my mind, this was going to be a memory we created together, something we'd look back on years from now. She must have noticed how disappointed I looked, because she quickly said she would be happy to go with me instead. But I told her she should go with whoever she actually wanted to go with more. I didn't want her to feel like she had to take me just because I was the one who bought the tickets. The second those words left my mouth, she immediately called her best friend and told her that they were going to the Taylor Swift concert together. That stung, like a punch in the gut. I sat there realizing I had basically just been cut out of the whole experience. I told her, though, that if her best friend wanted to go, she'd need to pay me for the ticket. And to her credit, she did. So, while my girlfriend and her friend were off at the concert screaming their hearts out to Taylor, I stayed behind. They both had a great time, but I couldn't shake this sinking feeling of betrayal. It wasn't just about the money, though $400 isn't exactly small change. It was about the fact that I thought I was creating a memory for us, something special we could share. I've never even been to a concert before, and while I'm not as big a Swiftie as my girlfriend, I do enjoy some of Taylor's music. For me, it was about being there together. Instead, I was left wondering if I'd been too quick to give up my ticket. Should I have held my ground and made it clear that I wanted to go? Or was I right to step back and let her choose? That's where the story ends. That one leaves kind of a heavy feeling. You can tell the guy really wanted it to be a shared memory, not just a gift to hand off. It's tough when your idea of a special moment doesn't line up with the other person's. Honestly, even though she had a fun time, it's not hard to see why he walked away feeling like the odd one out. Sometimes the sting isn't in the money or the ticket, but in who you thought would be standing next to you. This next story is about a couple's night out that turned tense when their server publicly confronted them over a tip. A few nights ago, my partner and I went out to an Italian restaurant we've been to a handful of times. It's not some super high-end, white tablecloth kind of place, but it's nice enough. The sort of spot where you can order a glass of wine, enjoy a quiet meal, and expect a decent evening without too much fuss. The night started fine, but it quickly became clear that our server, let's call her Samantha, wasn't exactly on her game. At first, she misplaced my drink order. I figured it was just a mix-up, nothing major. Then it happened again. My starter came out wrong, which slowed things down even more. And when we were ready for dessert, she vanished for what felt like forever. Now, I've worked in customer service myself, so I understand how chaotic things can get on a busy night. Mistakes happen, and usually I let little things slide. But all in all, the service that evening was pretty poor. Still, it wasn't the end of the world. We finished our meal, asked for the check, and got ready to head out. When the bill came, I paid and left a cash tip. 10%. Not a huge amount, but not nothing either. In my mind, it was fair considering how the night had gone. My partner and I stood up to leave, ready to put the whole thing behind us. But then Samantha walked over, picked up the cash, and looked right at me. She said out loud, "Seriously? This is it?" Her voice carried enough that several nearby diners turned to look. The entire restaurant seemed to freeze, and the air got heavy in an instant. I was stunned. I didn't even know what to say at first. My girlfriend looked uncomfortable, like she just wanted to disappear. And before I could even respond, Samantha doubled down. She said, "You know, servers can't pay their rent because of people like you. If you can't tip properly, don't dine out." At that point, the restaurant was dead silent, like one of those sitcom moments when everything stops after someone says something awkward. I stayed calm and just said, "Okay, sorry you feel that way." Then I turned and started to walk away, hoping to diffuse things. But as we were leaving, I heard her mutter, "Whatever, cheapskates," loud enough that it was clearly directed at us and anyone else listening. That crossed a line for me. I walked back over, leaned down to the table, and took my tip back without saying another word. We left the restaurant in silence, both of us processing what had just happened. Later, my girlfriend told me I'd handled it fine, that I'd stayed calm and didn't escalate things. But when I shared the story with a friend, he told me I overstepped by grabbing the tip back, that no matter what, once you leave it, you just walk away. For me, it wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that I had left a tip, and instead of just accepting it, Samantha had chosen to scold me, embarrass me in front of other diners, and then insult us on our way out. That felt completely out of bounds. That's where the story ends. That's such a weird position to be put in. On one hand, tipping is always a touchy subject, but on the other, no one deserves to get called out and insulted like that in front of a room full of people. I think a lot of us would have been tempted to do the same thing, take the money back and leave. What stands out most is how quickly a quiet night out can flip into one of those surreal, did that really just happen moments. This next story is about new homeowners dealing with a neighbor across the street who seems determined to cause trouble, starting with petty complaints and escalating into suspicious car damage. When my spouse and I bought our house, we already knew a little bit about the previous owners. They had warned us about one specific neighbor across the street, Gary. Apparently, he had a reputation for being a problem, calling the city over things like weeds or small issues around the yard. At first, we dismissed it. We figured maybe those complaints had been valid and the guy was just overly particular. Once we moved in, though, it didn't take long to see what they meant. All of our other neighbors were welcoming, helpful, and kind. In fact, several of them straight up told us that Gary was a pain, and not just in a little way. He had a history of making life difficult for anyone who lived near him. For the first 2 months, we focused on renovating before actually moving in. During that time, we had a waste management dumpster bag out front to hold debris from all the work we were doing. Not long after officially settling in, I got a knock on the door from a city inspector. She apologized right away and explained that someone had filed a complaint about blight at our property. The funny part was the only issue was a single piece of baseboard that had fallen just outside the dumpster bag. That was it. She said, "I can't tell you who the neighbor is, but I've been called to this house many times before. I'm so sorry." It wasn't hard to put 2 and 2 together. Clearly, Gary was already watching us and waiting for the smallest reason to make things difficult. Our other neighbors rolled their eyes and told us stories about him. But at the time, I just let it go. Then things escalated. Our niece was staying with us, and one night her friend came over and parked across the street, right in front of Gary's house. It wasn't illegal parking. She wasn't blocking anything. Just a normal car on the curb. The next morning, when they went to leave, her front passenger tire was completely flat. Not only that, but the valve stem core was missing. For anyone who doesn't know, that's not something that just falls out. It has to be physically removed with a little tool. They tried to drive to a shop to get it fixed, which wasn't the smartest move, but they managed to get air in the tire and replace the part. Later, when my niece called me to tell me what happened, I mentioned it to our next door neighbor, Nicole. The second I did, her reaction was immediate. She gasped and said, "Oh my gosh, that's Gary." Then she told me a story that made everything click. A few years earlier, Gary's other next door neighbors had a grown daughter living with them. One night, she parked in front of his house, and the next morning, her tire was mysteriously flat. Just like my niece's friend's car, the valve stem core had been removed. Nicole and another neighbor had actually seen her upset that morning, panicking because she was late for work, and they helped her get the tire fixed. Nicole pointed out the obvious. Those parts don't just fall out on their own. So now we were seeing a pattern. A few days later, I went over to Nicole and her husband's house again. He told me he had actually taken a picture of the car parked in front of Gary's, not knowing it was connected to us. He thought it belonged to renters from a vacation property down the street and worried something might happen. In the picture, you can clearly see the car is parked perfectly legally. No excuse for it to be tampered with. At this point, we don't have hard evidence that Gary did it, but all the stories line up. The citation from the city, the history with the previous owners, the flat tire with the valve stem removed, and Nicole's account from years back, it all points in one direction. My spouse and I are angry. Beyond angry, honestly. And I'll admit, I'm petty enough to want to handle this in a way that makes sure Gary can't keep pulling stunts like this without being caught. So, my plan right now is pretty simple. First, I'm going to file a police report. Even if nothing comes of it immediately, at least it will be on record. Then I'll have the officers talk to Nicole and her husband, since they've seen and dealt with similar behavior from him before. On top of that, we're investing in cameras. Not just one or two, every angle of the yard, front and back, covered by night vision cameras. And if I can swing it, I'll help Nicole set some up too. That way, if Gary decides to try something again, there will be no question about what happened or who was behind it. That story wraps up here. This one feels like something out of a neighborhood drama series. On one side, you got all these kind and friendly neighbors, and then across the street, there's Gary just making life harder for everyone. It's wild how predictable his behavior is once you hear the past stories. Honestly, getting cameras sounds like the perfect move. Nothing shuts down pettiness faster than having actual proof. I can imagine that first caught on camera moment being pretty satisfying. This next story is about a young server who formed a special bond with a regular customer only to have their life unexpectedly changed forever when they met his sister. Back in late 2009, I was 19 years old, living on my own in Miami Beach, Florida. I was juggling 2 serving jobs just to keep the lights on and scraping by to cover tuition at college. I had just started studying mathematics, and while I loved it, money was always tight. Every semester felt like a gamble. Could I afford to stay enrolled, or would I have to drop classes just to make rent? One of my serving jobs was at this seafood bar and grill, a kind of Key West version of a sports bar. That's where I met Jimmy. He was one of my regulars, a guy in his 40s who would come in every Sunday with his elderly mother. He always asked to be seated with me, and over time, he became more than just a familiar face. He was this incredibly sweet, quirky, creative guy. You could tell he was on the spectrum, but he was brilliant. He was also a painter, really talented, and every time he came in, he greeted me with this big, genuine smile that could brighten up even my toughest shifts. Between running food and refilling drinks, I'd find myself caught up in long conversations with him. We'd talk about everything: art, physics, the universe, even the stranger corners of science. He loved speculating about things like the double slit experiment, and honestly, I did too. We were kindred spirits in that way, both lighting up when the conversation drifted into the what ifs of reality. And maybe because I didn't brush him off or treat him like he was odd, we built this easy kind of friendship. Every Sunday, I looked forward to seeing Jimmy and his mom walk through the door. After about a year of these weekly visits, Jimmy was practically buzzing when he came in one Sunday. He told me his sister, Patty, was coming down from New York and that he couldn't wait for me to meet her. He was convinced I'd love her. When the day came, I walked over to his table and, sure enough, there she was. Thin, elegant, and earthy, with wild curly hair that just framed her face perfectly. She had this aura about her. She oozed charisma. You could tell instantly she cared deeply, but she also had this sharp, no-nonsense New York edge. Where Jimmy and I were dreamers, speculating about the mysteries of the universe, Patty struck me as someone savvy and grounded. She wasn't unfriendly, not at all, just straightforward in a way that was both intimidating and refreshing. Within minutes, I respected her. That day, Jimmy brought up school, like he often did. He knew I had picked out 4 classes for the upcoming semester, more than I'd ever tried before. What he didn't know was how worried I was about affording it. At that point, I didn't qualify for financial aid. I had no student loans. Everything came straight out of my pocket from what I made serving tables. 4 classes would run me about $1,200, and with rent looming, I knew I'd have to drop at least 1, maybe 2. When Jimmy asked me how I felt about the semester coming up, I tried to laugh it off. Smiling but embarrassed, I admitted I'd have to drop a couple of classes. He frowned, clearly disappointed for me, but I had to run off to another table before I could explain further. Later, when I came back, Patty casually asked how much my classes cost. I told her, thinking nothing of it. We kept talking, and I went about my shift, checking on other tables and grabbing refills. Toward the end of the meal, I came back again, chatting as I cleared plates. Then Patty extended her hand toward me, holding out a folded piece of paper. Instinctively, I took it. When I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. It was a check for $2,000. My knees nearly gave out. I stammered, trying to give it back, tears already welling in my eyes. But Patty wasn't having it. She didn't smile, didn't joke. She just gave me this firm look, all that New York no-nonsense energy in full force, and refused to take it back. She was serious. I stumbled into the kitchen and collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. My coworkers came rushing over, panicked, thinking something terrible had happened. I could barely choke out the words to explain. It wasn't bad news. It was the most incredible thing that had ever happened to me. When I finally pulled myself together, I went back out and thanked Patty again, this time a little more composed. I hugged her, told her how much it meant to me, and said goodbye. That moment stuck with me more than I can ever explain. With that check, I didn't have to drop a single class. I paid for all four, bought a graphing calculator, even managed to get myself a laptop. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was moving forward. And I did more than just get through the semester. I passed all four classes with straight A's. I'm not a mathematician yet, but I'm working toward it. And while I'm not wealthy now, I made a promise to myself that when I'm able, I'll do the same thing Patty did for me. That kind of kindness changes lives in ways that words will never fully capture. That's where the story ends. That one really hits different. Sometimes the people you least expect end up stepping into your life and leaving a permanent mark. I think what's so powerful is how casual it all started. Just a conversation over lunch, and suddenly everything changed. It makes you wonder how many quiet, life-changing moments like that are happening every day. And honestly, it's kind of comforting to think about. Anyways, that's all the stories I have for you today, and I hope it was a chill listen. If you had a good time, dropping a like and hitting that subscribe button really helps me out. And as always, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next one.